Welcome to A Researcher's Guide to Practical Ethics, Episode 1, Authorship. Now, authorship in academia is a big deal. Authorship is really important for you as a researcher because authorship will show that the paper is your work. It comes with two important facets. The first facet is that should you contribute to work that will get a Nature paper or a Nobel Prize, your name will always be associated with it. You will get part of the credit, which is great. It also means that you are responsible for what is in that paper. So should you do a piece of work that perhaps later is seen to be not quite as good, you will also always be associated with that paper. Now, assuming that your paper is going to be more of the Nobel Prize winning left side of the equation, less of the right side of the equation, it's also important in showing that you are productive and that you have a track record in the field so that when you go for funding or are looking for collaborators, they can see that you have expertise in the area. When it comes to authorship of a paper, order is important. Each position means a different thing. So here we have a lovely paper written by one of the PhD students, Ross Burton. And he was the first author. You can see that the amount of work put in is greatest by the first author and then kind of goes down as you get towards the middle authorship. Similarly, at the back, you can see that the seniority and overall responsibility of the paper is greatest for the last author. So the most prestigious places on an authorship list are the first author and the last author. The first author will have driven most of the work. It will usually be their project. That means that they will have been in charge of the direction of it. They will normally do the bulk of the writing. They almost certainly will have written the first draft. Then it comes down to the second and third authors and so on down to the middle. They will still play an important role, but they will be less involved. They might have been instrumental in providing samples. They may have helped shape the paper. They may have provided one or two figures for the paper. They may have done large sections of writing or provided a methodology that nobody else had, but it wasn't their project. They helped with the project as opposed to actually being the driving force. If we look now at the end, then you can see that the last author is normally the leader of the research group. They're usually the one that obtained the funding. They're usually the one that wrote the grants. Sometimes they also wrote the paper, particularly if the first author is a very new author. They will almost certainly have had a large part in editing the paper. And then second to last author, senior but not as senior as the final author. So that can be a very senior postdoc. In this particular case, Professors Artemiou and Eberl were equal last authors. So they both drove the project. They were co-leads. But usually the last author is the most senior and the second to last author is someone who potentially was reasonably senior, but not so much, maybe one of the senior collaborators. So these are the conventions in biosciences and medical publications, but there are also other discipline-specific conventions in other fields. So, for example, in the arts and humanities, the last author may not denote seniority, and it's a simple gradient from the most important first author to the least important last author. Or in mathematics and physics, you can have alphabetical order used, particularly if it's one of the really big physics papers which has hundreds of authors. These are just two examples of nuances in what authorship order can mean depending on the field in which you're studying. So who gets to be an author on this paper? Because lots and lots of people will have contributed. Working out who your authors are going to be is not always as straightforward as you might think. I mean, sometimes it's really easy. So, did the person do an experiment that is included in the final paper? Well, yes, that person gets authorship. Did they help keep the lab running, but not really help with these particular experiments? So, maybe somebody who is working on the fax machine, flow cytometer, or who provided a little bit of background on how to do your surveys. Well, they are probably acknowledgements. Same if they just reviewed the paper and provided a few suggestions for improvements. But if you ended up, say, substantially changing the paper because one of your editors brought up a really good point and you ended up doing another experiment in order to make sure that point was completely explored, then you may want to consider authorship because they've made a substantial intellectual contribution and thus they should be authors. Now, this whole process of negotiating who is going to be an author is very nuanced and can be quite tricky. So, a system has been come up with to make it a little bit more straightforward. And this is the credit system. So, credit stands for Contributor Roles Taxonomy, and it's now used by many of the large publishing houses. So, if you're going to be putting a paper in, then the credit system is so widely used that if you have done it in advance, you're pretty much getting set up for your publication. The credit system has 14 different contributions that each author could have made. So what you do is you have your 14 different contributions that people can make, and then you just say which authors have done which part. Often this will be as a matrix when you put your paper in for submission to a journal, and it will end up looking something like this down the bottom, where you've got a list of who did what. And then from there you can look and you can determine also where in the author list people should be put. Now, this is going to be a complicated thing because authorship involves people, and because it's so important, there are sometimes disputes over where people go on the list. That's understandable, but it is also something that you really want to avoid if you can. So let's see how you can prevent having authorship disputes in the first place. Often you'll see the advice of know what your authorship is at the beginning. Honestly, at the beginning of a project, it's not always obvious who is going to be an author. If you have a project that has people coming on board halfway through, people that might produce just a single piece of data and then leave the project, you're not going to know that in advance. But by the time you're putting together your first serious draft, you should really have a fairly good idea of who your authorship list is. So put that down at that point. Make sure as you make successive drafts that you have author lists on all of them and that you update those lists and where people are on the author list. This means that when you get to the end, you will not give anyone a nasty surprise or get any nasty surprises, which may lead to people kicking back and being pretty upset about the whole thing. If you're going to use alphabetical order, let everyone know in advance. Alphabetical order is absolutely fine. It's often used for middle authors where everyone's done a little bit, but there's no real way of telling who's done more than one of the others. Just let them know so that they're not expecting that because Dr. A has got their name in front of Dr. B, you're saying that Dr. A did more. Similarly, if you're going to use the credit system, let people know in advance. It can be really useful because people can then actually fill that in for you and you can have a look. You can talk to each other about what people think they have and haven't done, and then the actual author list will be much, much easier to deal with. Consider using collaborative writing programs. So you can now just do this with, for example, Teams, but others are available. And collaborative writing will mean that people can see live updates of the manuscript, and you can ask them to put their collaboration in as you go. It can be very, very useful for getting things done quickly and for ensuring that everyone agrees and that you get comments in early. And finally, Don't forget that joint first authorship and joint senior authorship are possibilities. If you have two people that have really driven this project, say from two different ways, maybe one has done in vivo biology and one has done some molecular biology, and the two things have come together to make the most amazing paper, but both have given about the same amount, you can always put them as joint first authors. Similarly, you can do joint senior authors for if you have collaborating research groups. And if there's two connected projects, then you may be able to have them as two separate papers. This can be also useful where you have two first authors and actually there's really too much information there to go into one paper, and one story is getting subsumed by the other. Potentially, you can have them as two separate papers. Now, if you're a junior member of a research lab, then sometimes it's easy for you to be left off of papers. So I wanted to give a few strategies to help prevent this, just little things that you can do. First of all, make sure you keep good records of your research, how you did it, when you did it, what you did. Include on that who you worked with in case you want to write the data up later. You may go to write that data up 5 years later. If that's the case, you may not remember exactly who helped you. You'll want to make sure that they get the credit for the work that they did. I know this sounds straightforward, but you'd be surprised how often it's forgotten. Make sure the records are accessible to the people that need them. If you have saved your data beautifully, all of it, and then you put it on a password-protected hard drive, which you left on a shelf in the lab and you forgot the password, the records are not going to be accessible. It's as if you never did the experiment. They will not be able to be included in papers, and then you are going to lose the authorship. And you may say, I have done that work when you see the data come out later. But by then, it's too late. And it's not because people did anything wrong, it's because people didn't know where or how to get those records. When you've discussed potential papers, potential ideas, email people afterwards. Just make sure that everyone knows exactly what was said, especially if someone has said, would you like to collaborate? And if you've said yes, then email them afterwards. Have that little touching of base, and you'll find that it will help a great deal if anything comes of it later. And when you move on from a laboratory, make sure, or a research group, make sure everyone has an email address they can reach you at. So this might be a separate email address that you keep for the purpose, because if you're going between different universities, sometimes your email addresses will change every 2 to 3 years. Hand out your LinkedIn profile liberally. Anybody who wants it, just hand it to people that you're working with. Make sure people can find you, because if they can't find you, then they're going to struggle to keep you on as an author. When they do find you, make sure you reply to them promptly, be helpful, and be professional. And that will help avoid any disputes and will make sure that where you deserve credit, you do get it. Okay. And now 2 things not to do. The first thing, gift authorship. It's something that we've seen more in the past, but thankfully it seems to be reducing. This is where someone who doesn't deserve authorship gets it anyway. You don't need to give authorship to everyone. If they don't actually deserve authorship, just because they haven't done enough, they may be wonderful people, but if they haven't done enough to get authorship, you can always put them in the acknowledgements. So one of the cases where you often see this is where you have a powerful professor who gets their name put onto a paper. Sometimes this is because the powerful professor pushes for it, and they may be head of department or something, but sometimes this is because people think that if powerful professor's name is on there, it gives their paper a little bit of starshine, and then they're more likely to get it accepted. That is not a good idea. The other way that it happens is if somebody inserts, for example, a postdoc or your friend in the next lab across who has promised to put you on their next paper if you put them on yours. No. If you're doing that, and if you're doing the powerful professor thing too, what you're doing is you're uncoupling authorship from effort. It means authorship is no longer a sign of your science or of your ability as a humanities researcher. It's just now how many friends you have or how much power you have. That's not what it is for. This means that it cheapens when you have put genuine effort in. The other thing that happens, and it's related to what we saw before, is ghost authorship. This is where somebody has definitely done enough to get authorship, but they're not there. This will happen most often to junior researchers. So if you're on a paper, if you see somebody has just been taken off of the paper and you feel that they deserve it to be on the paper as an author still, make sure that you're there. This is where empathy and a bit of a sense of justice should come in play. In conclusion, authorship is really important in the literature. It establishes whose work it is and who's responsible for the work. The order makes a difference because it will show whether you were a driver in the research or whether you did some of the things that contributed to the research as a collaborator. When you are doing your papers, you should always extend the credit through authorship to those that have made a meaningful contribution to the paper. If people don't qualify for authorship, you should definitely still acknowledge them. Put them into the acknowledgements and say what they have done and why you are acknowledging their help and knowledge. It's much easier to do this now using the credit system. It's widely used by publishing houses, it's widely used by funders. It can greatly simplify assigning authorship, and it does it transparently so everyone can see exactly what people have done. And finally, good communication, clear knowledge of who has done what as you are writing the paper will prevent difficulties in confidently assigning appropriate authorship later on. And this is really good because that means that you can get to the point where you go and press the submit manuscript button. For more information on any of these things, I've put down several websites that you might want to go to, and you can always email us at researchonresearch@cardiff.ac.uk. Thank you very much for your attention, and good luck with your manuscripts.